being a discovery writer, a pantser, or whatever you want to call it, having the confidence that it is going to turn out okay if you just keep going. Because in every first draft, there's a period, sometimes it's very short, sometimes it's very long, as with the Cartographers, where the book is just not good. That's the only way to say it. It's just really not good. But you have to know that it will be, and you have to keep going through the not good for sometimes a very long time. And I think if it happens to you eh, early, you know, it happened to me with the Book of M, but it wasn't a long phase. And so I managed to push through it before I got really scared. And then the book came out and everything was great. And with the Cartographers, I was in that phase for like 2 years straight. Everything I wrote was not right. And then every draft I sent my editors, she was like, this is still not it either. We're not. And I think that if I had not had the experience of the Book of M, knowing that it can be kind of bad for a little bit, um, I would have, during those 2 years, I just would have thought, okay, well, maybe this just means this is not the book I'm supposed to write, or maybe I'm not a writer or something. And I wouldn't have stuck with it long enough to get to the end and then, have the Cartographers. And so surviving that one too, especially like surviving it a second time and surviving a really brutal form of it helped me with All This and More, because, at one point, All This and More is just the paths are like this. And I was doing it on such a tight deadline that it was, at one point, there was a period of time where I could not even give a chunk of the book to anyone to look at, because all of it there was nothing continuous enough that read well enough that somebody could see it. And so for the longest time, it was just, I am writing. You can't even see one page, but I had to just trust the process that I've done this twice before. It has always worked out. If you keep going, it's going to work out this time too. And then thank goodness it did.
Hello and welcome to this special author interview for FanFiAddict. I'm Frasier Armitage, part-time robot, full-time nerd, author of New Yesterday and Time's Ellipse. And with me today is one of my all-time favorite authors. I absolutely love this author's books. They are perfect, so I cannot wait to talk to her about them. You'll know her from the Book of M, The Future Library, The Cartographers, and her most recent book, All This and More. It is the best in the biz, the legend that is Peng Shepherd. Peng, how are you doing today?
Hello. Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure to chat with you. I'm a super fan of your book, so spoiler alert, I may sort of freak out as we're talking. If that happens, I can't control it. It just happens.
I love it. I love it.
So let's talk about All This and More. It's awesome. What can people expect from it?
It is, it's sort of a lot like my other books. It's kind of a combination of genres, or it's sort of crossing all over the place. It's got a little bit of thriller, it's got a little bit of mystery, like a little bit of romance, a little bit of science fiction. I'd say like a lot of darkness, probably is how I would describe it. So it's sort of, it's kind of like a something for everyone book, but it's like an adventure, I would say,
Yeah,
most of
definitely.
all.
And it's an
Yeah.
adventure that people can choose, right?
Yes. Yeah. It is about a woman named Marsh. It's her nickname, and everyone calls her that because it's short for Marshmallow. Because that's really her personality. She's this woman she's sweet and generous and soft, but she has basically spent her whole life just playing it safe. She's always made the responsible choice. She's pleased everyone before she's pleased herself. She's tried not to rock the boat, and so she gets to middle age and she just realizes her life is nothing like what she had hoped it would be when she was much younger. Her marriage is imploding, her teenage daughter is growing distant, her career just like never took off, and she never got to do any of the things that she dreamed she would. She just missed out on romance, adventure, I mean just everything. And as we all know, if you could go back, you would always do everything so much better the second time around, because you would know what a chance it was. But she feels the same. She's heartbroken and she wishes she could do it again. And then this show called All This and More chooses her to be its next contestant. And All This and More it's like a game show, kind of like a mix between a game show and a reality show. And it has somehow figured out, here's the science fiction, how to send people back to very specific moments in their past to let them change that choice, and then it changes the course of their present lives. And so, when she gets that opportunity, she just jumps. She knows this is it. This is her only chance. She's got to do it. And everything is going great at first, but even as her life is getting better and better, it's clear that there's something strange going on under the surface, and like something's a little bit off. And so she's got to figure out what's going on before she gets to the end of her season, and then her life is set. And so that's kind of the premise. I've gone on and on. I'm sorry. But the thing that was so fun about it for me to write was that it's because it is a book about choices and like almost infinite choices, and figuring out if you did have endless possibilities, how would you know what is the right thing to choose. I didn't want readers to just read that as a story passively. I wanted you to feel like kind of the same thrill and the same danger that Marsh is facing at having to make these choices. And so I wrote the book with multiple paths so that you can read it straight through like a regular novel, or if you are feeling brave, you can help Marsh choose what she decides to do in the book, which can, depending on what you choose, change her story.
So you don't just get one story in here, you get a collection. In effect, you get all this.
And more. Yeah.
I love that that worked. That's so cool.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Because like in the show, that's kind of like that's like the ending of every episode, isn't it? You've got like this host who's like
Mhm.
doing the all this, and then Marsh is like the and more, and it's like it keeps you
Yeah.
hooked, it keeps you going. You're so good at writing
Yeah.
those as well. Like with the Book of M, like Blue 52. You've got all this and more. You're you are controlling what people will scream at you in the street, Pang. I love it. It's great. It's
Oh, I hope so. I would love if people screamed all this and more at me in the
yeah.
street.
um the the choose your own adventure aspect of it. What's like your experience with that type of book? Is it something that you've read a lot or not very much?
I read a few when I was a kid. I think we all did, right? That was when they were really big. And at the time I was just obsessed with them. They were so fun. But I always thought it was kind of strange how there weren't very many when we got older. It just seems to kind of die out as a genre the older you get. And I did think about it a lot while I was trying to write this book, because I was just trying to figure out what is the reason. And I think the difference is between them that the kids versions, they are so fun. And it's such a thrill to read them when you're little, because when you're young you basically have no choice, because you're little. You're not old enough to have a job. You just go to school, your parents pick what you're eating for dinner. Like that's just, you don't have any choice. And so any choice at all is really fun, even when it's super random and it kind of doesn't sometimes it doesn't always make sense. You start the book and you and then by page 10 you're I don't know, saving your school from pirates, or there's zombies, or like it just doesn't make any sense, but it's fine. But when you're an adult, I think you have entirely too much choice sometimes, and it's exhausting. And so nobody wants to just be put through a bunch of random things that feel like work. And so I tried very hard, because I really did want to write something with multiple paths, and I really wanted to involve the reader and make it kind of interactive. And so I knew that for all this and more, it had to be like thematically relevant. It had to matter that I was asking you, the reader, to choose these things. I was not just asking you to do it just to have a structure. It had to cost you something. It has to be like most emotionally meaningful.
Yeah, because it's not a gimmick because of the way that you have written it and because of the themes that you bring into it and also the concept that you wrap it around. It is very much an intrinsic part of the experience of the book. That interactivity that you've kind of put into it. Do you feel like that is a little bit like what you get when you're a writer, like with your characters and with your stories and with your world,
Mm.
that you're kind of interacting with it in that way where you can choose a path and then if you don't really like it, you can come back and choose another one. Do you find that there's parallels in that?
That is such a good Insight. I kind of do. I've never thought about it like that before, but I think, especially for me, because I write without an outline, I just kind of go forth into the darkness and see what's there. And there is a lot of that, trying one thing. And then it doesn't so much feel that I can try any path with a character, because there really is only one path that feels true for that person. Because if you want them to feel like a real person, they cannot just do anything. They definitely have a personality and their wants, but it is a process of finding which of those paths is the right one, like very much so.
Definitely. And like you're saying about with the idea that they can't do anything with the
Mhm.
show, that kind of it it must have been so hard because you're kind of inviting the character to do anything by having them rewrite their life to live out whatever fantasies they want to live out. You've got some paths which result in them joining the circus and others where they go to space, and it's amazing. Did you get to a point where you were writing things that were becoming like too outrageous for Marsh? Is there aspects of that you had to like scale it back, or how did you figure out the limits of where Marsh could go with the show?
Oh my gosh. Well, it was probably a combination of, so there definitely were paths that were like way too outlandish. And it's also great to have a very good editor, which I do. The first draft of it was much longer, and there were a lot of paths that we cut that she, pointed out that like maybe it's really fun or maybe it's really interesting, but it just doesn't feel true, or it's just so far out there that it doesn't match. But that's part of the, I don't know, that's part of the, it's part of my process anyway, because I do write just by exploring. And so there's always a lot of stuff cut on the floor.
Yeah. How do
Yeah.
you pants a book like this? How do you like just feel your way through it? Because it's so structural in sort of making sure that as a reader you can follow this path and jump here and jump back here and you're not missing anything. And how did you do it? Because that is like
I know.
how it blows my mind just even thinking about how you might have done it. So what was it like?
I mean, well, if you, this is the truth, whether you believe it or not, but I actually wrote almost all of it without even having a map, like a flow chart, I know, but it sort of makes sense to me, because it is a book about lots of different pathways, but it's the same person always. And so it sort of felt like to me, if I could hold the whole thing in my head without a map, that would mean that it was all true, right? Even though they're different versions of her life or she's made different choices, it still feels, like Marsh. And so I really did try to do the whole thing without a map. And I only made one at the very end, because I realized that when I turned this in, my editor would jump off the roof if I asked her to read it without one. And so I did not want her to do that. So I made a map, and thank goodness it did work. Everything linked up. Uh, but yeah, it was, I have no idea. Now knowing how much it was, I don't know if I could do it again this way.
I was just like mind blown because I know from previous interviews that you've done and you going into this that you like to feel your way through the book and that you were pantsing it. So I was fascinated to see how you'd structured it, and that is just insane that you were able to do all of that in the nicest possible way, Pung. I don't mean what
I appreciate it.
yeah, your imagination, it must be to go inside there must be amazing. But in terms of when you got to the end of it, um, what was your feeling about sort of where you ended up? In terms of once you'd written the final words and it was all done and it was all out, what was that feeling like?
Oh, um it's interesting actually, because this book was written so quickly, and especially compared to the Cartographers, which was written very, very slowly. I think that book took, I don't know, 4 years or something, 4, maybe 5, until it was finally out. And this one, we were writing it on such a deadline that I was sending my editor chunks of it as we, chunks of the pathways as we were going, and she was reading it. And I'd be like, okay, here's the next 100 pages. Here's the next 100 pages. Cause we were trying so hard not to move the book, to next year. And so sometimes it almost feels like I'm not done writing it in some ways. Every time I open it up, because I've got to, check something or find something, I still feel like there's another pathway that I forgot about and it's going to go, this way. So yeah, it's definitely it's like fresh and it's still I'm still living in it for sure.
That's cool. Uh, w-
Yeah.
you you were also writing this while you were not in the US, right? You were traveling and you were
Mhm.
abroad. How did that help with crafting the narrative?
It was really I think it's just really inspiring, because I knew that I wanted Marsh to have a lot of adventures, and so she ends up or you can, not necessarily have to, but you can send her to places like Iceland or Mexico or Hong Kong. And so being able to go to those places and be in them while I was writing was just so I just made them so much more vivid and it felt so much more real. So I hope that that does come across when people are reading it that, you know,
Yeah, it really does. Because with having with having never been to these places, it's very difficult to sort of like picture them, but I feel like
mm,
the way that you described them, because you don't get a lot of room for description because Marsh is experiencing it all as fresh, so she's taking things
yeah,
in, but it's not like these
yeah,
are sort of long drawn out landscapes, but you
mhm.
really get a sense of atmosphere about the place with what you've chosen to include. When you are traveling and you're going about, are you conscious of trying to do that, to try and pick up on like the feel of a place, or is it more just about your experience at the time and then thinking about that afterwards?
Yeah, I think it's more the second because it almost feels like if you pay too much attention in that way while you're there, you're not really going to absorb it in the same sort of like when you go see something and you take a photo, you're not really paying attention to the experience of absorbing what it really feels like there. You're just taking the photo. And then you go home and you look at the photo, but you didn't feel what you're supposed to feel. So I do try really hard not to do that while I'm in these places and to just absorb it and think about it. And usually I write the sections that are in those places after I've come back because that way it's really had a chance to kind of settle and
When you look back at being in those kinds of places, is there something that really stands out to you about, one place or another that you kind of like a memory or a moment that is going to be in there forever?
oh my gosh. Well, the thing that strikes me the most was just the landscape of Iceland. Have you been to Iceland yet?
No, never. I would love to
Okay,
go.
you must go. You must go. It's close for you. Actually, it's about the same distance probably. It's right about the same distance between New York and the UK, I think. But it is it's just the most strange landscape in a good way. It's so beautiful and it's so different from any other kind of landscape I've ever seen. And so the whole time I was there, I felt like I was just walking around with my mouth open. Everything I looked at was like the first time I had seen something like that. And it really did feel like I was at the end of the world. If, our round world could have an end, that is definitely one of the ends because it's so I have no other word but strange. It's so strange. Everyone listening to this must go. It's beautiful and yeah.
You need to write a book entirely set in Iceland so you have as much chance to be able to go back and be like, I'm doing it for research. It's all research for the book.
I know, right? But the problem is there are too many Icelandic writers. There's so many Icelandic writers writing Icelandic crime. I feel like there's just no there's no room.
I I remember when you were traveling around about the time that you were writing this book and you were posting some of the pictures on Instagram and you were putting them in your
Mhm.
stories and stuff. And there was one where you were hugging a sloth. Was that while you were over there, or was that somewhere else? Because I remember that sticks in my mind because I was at a zoo looking at a sloth, thinking, "Oh, I must take a picture of this and maybe put
And
it
then
on
you're like,
Instagram." And then I went, opened the
yeah.
thing up, started checking some stories, and there you were hugging a sloth. And I was like, "Okay, I don't need to put this picture of this sloth that's miles away. Pung's got it covered." But
Oh, that's funny. No, that was I think that was Honduras, which was around the same time. Yeah, I was writing the very end, very late, so late. I think I hugged that sloth, ran back to my room, and kept writing the book, but I couldn't miss the sloth.
I was really worried for you because, like, sloths, to me, I feel like they are like the scariest animal in the world because,
They are kind of weird looking.
well, they're super cute and they must be so comfortable to like fluffy and lovely and everything like that. But like,
Yeah.
Law of the Jungle is kill or be killed, right? And
Yeah.
and they move at this speed. and yet somehow they
Mhm.
survive. I think that like nature knows something we don't know about the sloths, right? Which is why they stay out of their way, because otherwise they just
Uh,
wouldn't be there. So I think, they've done a
oh.
great PR job for making themselves really like lazy and oh yeah, they can only move this fast. Yeah, of course they
Yeah,
can. So I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
when the sloth uprising comes, it's good for you to have friends among them. I think that's a really good move.
Yes, it definitely is.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um, with regard to your previous books, so Book of M, The Cartographer, those are your
Mhm.
novels, aren't they? What lessons did you learn from writing those books that really helped you with this one?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the biggest one is that it was just having the confidence, especially being a discovery writer, a pantser, or whatever you want to call it, having the confidence that it is going to turn out okay if you just keep going. Because in every first draft, there's a period, sometimes it's very short, sometimes it's very long, as with the cartographers, where the book is just not good. That's the only way to say it. It's just really not good. But you have to know that it will be, and you have to keep going through the not good for sometimes a very long time. And I think if it happens to you eh, early, you know, it happened to me with the Book of M, but it wasn't a long phase. And so I managed to push through it before I got really scared. And then the book came out and everything was great. And with the cartographers, I was in that phase for like 2 years straight. Everything I wrote was not right. And then every draft I sent my editors, she was like, this is still not it either. We're not. And I think that if I had not had the experience of the Book of M, knowing that it can be kind of bad for a little bit, um, I would have during those 2 years, I just would have thought, okay, well, maybe this just means this is not the book I'm supposed to write, or maybe I'm not a writer or something. And I wouldn't have stuck with it long enough to get to the end and then, have the cartographers. And so surviving that one too, especially like surviving it a second time and surviving a really brutal form of it helped me with All This and More because, at one point, All This and More is just the paths are like this. And I was doing it on such a tight deadline that it was at one point there was a period of time where I could not even give a chunk of the book to anyone to look at because all of it there was nothing continuous enough that read well enough that somebody could see it. And so for the longest time it was just I am writing, you can't even see one page, but I had to just trust the process that it's I've done this twice before. It has always worked out. If you keep going, it's going to work out this time too. And then thank goodness it did.
That is such great advice for writers, isn't it? Of just trust the
Yeah.
process, trust yourself, you will get there in the end.
Yeah.
I love that. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about sort of, you're saying about the different choices and the different paths and everything being branched out and everything. When did you choose when you like at what point to branch out a path? Was that like an organic thing that just happened, or was that something where, you kind of reached a certain point and you felt like a pressure of like, right, okay, I've written X amount, I need to make a choice for people now. What was that process like of to decide when are you going to split the different paths?
Yeah, actually, this is where I have to give a lot of credit to my editor because in the first draft that I sent her, there was a choice at the end of every chapter. And there were something like, because you get more than one, you get more than one choice in at the end of a chapter. So I don't know, there was something like 50 choices or 75 choices or something. And across the whole book, and she said, this is way too much. And sometimes it almost feels like you're just having a choice there just to have a choice, which was exactly the opposite of what I wanted. I wanted every choice to really mean something. And I didn't want them to feel random or gimmicky or anything like that. And so she said, what if can you scale it back so there's only a choice when you really, really need to? Or what if you try to keep it under 10 or some number like that, like 10 choices across the whole book is all you can do. And it it was hard. It was really hard to. I knew she was right. I could feel that she was right when she said it, but it took a lot of figuring out where to cut the choices and where to force the reader to just keep going down a path. But I think, um, yeah, I mean, I think she was so right because the way that it is now, you, the reader, only encounter a choice when it is really important for Marsh to make one, and so hopefully when you get to those choices, you really get to think about it with her, and it makes you really, question, like, what would be important to me at this moment. If I were Marsh and these were the things I was deciding between, what would be important to me? Would I be okay giving up what I, because you're going to have to give up something. So.
I felt like some of the choices no-brainers because I was like, okay, I know what I would do in this situation if I were Marsh. I know what I
Mhm.
wanted to do. Some of the choices, I'm not even going to tell you how long I spent thinking about them before I eventually made a choice. Because
Excellent.
particularly like there's one that happens, I think maybe about halfway through the book around about that sort of time. And I
Mhm.
honestly did not know what I wanted to happen. I was so on the edge of my seat over every possibility. I was like, and it was so good that you'd put that little instruction in the front of, if you don't know what to do, just do this. Because without that,
Mhm.
I think I would still be stuck at that point now. It was just like, it was amazing. But finding the right points of making the reader think about what they would want, um, did in that process, is that the way that you read books normally? Like, are you involved as a reader at that level when you're reading, or do you, because I think when we're writers, we look at a book and we read it sometimes in a different way because we're looking and we're saying,
Mhm.
right, okay, I really like what this person's done here or what that person's done there, or if I was writing it, I might do this or do that. Is that your experience when you're reading? Are you thinking in those kinds of terms?
Yeah, it's I don't wanna say that becoming a writer has ruined reading for me, but it definitely, now that I've written a couple books and I, have had to plan my own structures or figure out, how to, like, what to care about in a character. When I read a book now, there's a lot of like, "Oh, yeah, I can see what you're doing here," looking under the hood kind of feeling. And so my favorite books are when I'm reading it and I'm just so caught up in it that all I'm doing is feeling, and I'm like not catching the twists, I'm not noticing the things that they're planting, I'm just not seeing the machinery because it's just so emotional. And so when that does happen, because every year it takes like more and more to do that to me, and so I just love it when that happens.
Yeah, and those are the kind. So I think that your books that you write are those kinds of books. I think they're just that. Yeah, they're
Oh,
perfect.
thank
I
you.
love them.
I hope
The
so. I mean, that
the
would be, like the that's like the most you can want, right? As a writer.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
And the great thing about this is that even like the way that you approach the character of Marsh and the other characters that are involved, you don't get so sidetracked by the mechanics of things that you're ever taken out from the character and the emotions of it and all of this kind of thing. So it's not a case whereby you feel overwhelmed by the choices that you are not feeling. And
Mhm.
it's how do you in when you are writing, how much of it is rooted in character and how much of it is rooted in sort of like situation and world and plot, and is it does it just all come naturally, or have you had to sort of craft yourself to be like character first?
Yeah, that's so I think the answer to your question is that it always should be character, I think, because character is plot and it is situation, because a situation is just, it's not really anything unless you are considering the person that's in it. That's what makes the situation matter. And so it really should always be about character. And it's definitely, that's, I think it's the hardest part, but the most important part. And so it's a lot of times I kind of write in layers, I think. And so a lot of times I will just be laying down the premise first and then I'm kind of layering some story on top of it. And that's the point at which nothing really, things are hanging together, but they don't really feel that meaningful yet, and they're not that exciting. And it's only when then you go back and you really figure out, like, who is this person? Who's this character I'm writing about? That's when the whole thing starts to come alive. And so that's usually, it kind of comes a little bit later for me. I know some people start with it, but it comes later for me. And then it's just, that's the thing that takes the most time and is the most complicated.
Yeah, and I love how all of those layers, you feel that in the characters because, like with Marsh, she's making changes and she's rewriting history. So, you are writing an entirely new set of circumstances that she finds herself in, but you are so
Mhm.
grounded because by the time that she gets to that point, you've gone through the layers of her character to the point whereby, you are just rooted and you are in this with her, and you kind of sense how she feels about it even before you read about it. It's like, and
Oh,
I love
good.
that you've got those. It's not just layers of world, but it's layers of character. And I thought that, yeah, I thought by the time, because the first 50 pages, no choices, you're just getting to know Marsh.
Mhm.
And I thought that
Mhm.
was such a brilliant introduction. So yeah, in terms of character, I think you absolutely nailed it. One thing I do want to ask you about character wise specifically,
Yeah.
Team Dylan or Team Ren?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question. So I wonder how I can talk about it without spoiling anything. So Ren, so Dylan is Marsh's husband, soon to be ex-husband at the beginning of the book because their marriage has slowly been falling apart for like 20 years, and then he does something pretty bad right at the beginning and it feels like it's all over. And Ren is her old high school sweetheart. He's kind of the one that got away, and he comes back into her life just at this moment when she kind of could, branch out and like start seeing new people, except she also puts that in jeopardy with the mistakes she makes. So then she's got, these two guys that she could choose between, and they're each offering a very different version of life, right? Like one is the man she's been married to, she's got a lot of history, she's a family with him, and then the other one is like exciting new adventure. So I do love them both for different reasons. I have to say, what ends up, maybe I can say this without spoiling it. What happens with Ren was not what I thought was going to happen when I started writing the book. He has, um, I really can't say more than that without, Ren's character, he developed for me in a really surprising way. I didn't think that it would go in that direction. And then I found that was just where the characters kept pushing that way, and it was just begging to, you know,
I
go sideways
it
in the
was
way that it does.
it was surprising for all of us, Pung, but I'm so glad it was surprising for you as well. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm so glad you didn't say I'm Team Marsh, because otherwise that would have been like, yeah,
I'm team pickle, the pet.
yeah.
I'm team pickle.
Which pickle is your pickle?
Right? All of
Yeah.
them. So I love, okay, Pickle was so fun to write. So Pickle is Marsh's pet dog. He's a black Labrador. That is his original form. And when she starts the show, he comes with her along for the ride because he's a part of her life. But as things start to go wrong, one of the first signs that something is going wrong is that Pickle is a little bit different in every episode. And sometimes it's just the color of his fur, and sometimes it's something else, like he is a different animal. And so it was just so fun to like stick him in as a little Easter egg into some scenes, because he usually only appears for just a second, but in a very weird way, and it's confusing and jarring, and she's like, wait, is something that doesn't make any sense.
It really helps you to get your head around the fact that something has changed as well. And the
Hmm.
idea of like, almost like for her, she comes sort of like facing a new reality, and she's like, okay, I need to just tick these off the list. Okay, what's pickle? What's the, and you kind of like, you get these things every time. And she kind of finds a
Yeah.
groove with it. And so by the time that
Yeah.
pickle is coming in the most random thing, she's just like, okay, pickle's this now. It's like, it
Yeah.
just becomes
Yeah.
so
What does that
ordinary.
mean for
Yeah.
yeah.
I love it. Um, okay, if the book were to be adapted into
Hmm.
another type of media, what
Hmm.
would you love to see it adapted into?
Oh, I mean, I think because it is following a TV show format, because Marsh has in the book 10 episodes to make her life better. And then, however, it is at the end of the 10th episode, that's what she's got and that's what she has to live with. So there's this ticking clock. I think it would just work great as a TV show in and of itself, because you'd have the same 10 episodes and it's getting closer and closer and closer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
If the TV show were real,
Hmm.
would you what would you prefer to be? Would you prefer to be like a just like a viewer or like a contestant or like the host? Is there like a which
Oh,
which would you prefer out of all the different options?
even if I was gonna have a cameo?
Yeah, or you could be
Oh,
you could
let's
be the
see.
star, or you could be
There's no
which what would you want to
Um,
be?
that's a good question. I think it would be fun to be the host, the person who is kind of pushing Marsh. Her name is Talia, and she pushes Marsh to, make kind of more and more daring choices, and she's trying to get her out of her comfort zone. And at first it's like, she's trying to help her make the most of her season, but at the same time, you have to start to wonder after a while, is she really doing it for Marsh's sake, or is she doing it for like the TV's rating sake, or is she doing it for some other mysterious reason? So I would love to be the host because I think that would be kind of fun, but also I'm a terrible actor. So
I
yeah.
I think that it would be great. I think you'd smash it, Pung. But I was thinking about, if the even if the show was like absolutely sort of like real, um,
Mhm.
it would be so fun to be the host as well because you could be like helping a friend. Like if you had a friend that was on the
Yeah.
show and you'd be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I can do this for you and I can do this for you," and it would be so
Yeah.
cool, right? To be in there with
Yeah.
them. It would be, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really, really good answer.
And finally, like, make them do the thing that you know that they should do.
Yeah,
You've
yeah.
been saying for so you're like, "Oh, if only I could," but then you could.
Yeah, and then you'd be like, "See?" It's, if, because we're talking about sort of like things that you could have done differently. Now
Mhm.
that the book is here and finished and out there in the world, when you read it, is there any part of it that you kind of wish that you could just gone back and just tweak a little bit or, like, done slightly differently?
Oh. Hmm. Well, I sometimes think about all the paths that were cut that couldn't, because it was probably 1.5 times as long as it is now, the version that is gonna come out in stores. It was 1.5 times as long, and my editor was just like, "It's too long. It's gonna scare people," because they're not gonna understand that you don't necessarily end up reading the entire book. It's you read most of the book, but no matter what path you choose, or if you don't choose a path and you go straight through, you're still inevitably not going to see everything because it is a multiple path book. But, if you're just picking it up in the bookstore, you're not going to realize that a 600-page book is going to terrify some people. We're all really busy. So we did have to cut a lot of paths. And I think we made the right choices about which one to keep. But sometimes I do think about all the paths not taken, if you will.
So, in if I was a contestant on All This and More, I would
Mhm.
be sort of like choosing all of the universes in which all of your books were that length because I just want more and more and more. Like, what wasn't the Cartographers much longer as well when you wrote that one?
Oh my gosh, it was and it wasn't. So the cartographers, I think what is there, which is maybe it's like 400 pages, I can't remember, but the book that is there, it was always that length. It's just that I rewrote it so many times, and each one was so different that it was an entirely new book. So if you just stacked all the versions together, it's probably like 3 or 4 times as long if you could just read them all back to it was so much. I can't even explain. I mean, that's why it took 5 years, because it was just so hard to get it right, you know?
See, I would love to read that version of the book. That would just be like you should do like collector's editions and just put them out there, just like the whole thing, and just be
Right?
like, yeah, that would be amazing. I would love that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
thematically, I want to talk
Mhm.
to you about something that has been on my mind since reading the book. Um, it's all about this idea of like idealism, like finding the ideal set of circumstances. And is it possible that you can find that level of idealism in your present without the gift of
Mm.
hindsight? Or is in some ways hindsight required to be able to get clarity over what your ideal life is?
Hmm. I think that's the whole gift of getting older, right? Because when you're younger, uh, so I do think you kinda do need hindsight a little bit, and the obstacle, or the difficulty with being so young, is that you don't really have a lot of hindsight yet, and so it is a little harder to be satisfied or to be as grateful or as aware of what you've got, if you're, I don't know, 13, 16, 22. But the older you get, the more hindsight you have. And so even though it's not like you literally get to go back and redo these things, just having all of that behind you, I think it does help you appreciate where you are more, because you remember how hard you worked to get to where you are now, even if it's not perfect, because nothing can be perfect. You just, you can feel what you've earned.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I think that the overriding message that I got from the book was such a hopeful one, with the idea of like, yeah, you don't have to go on this game show to be able to get that, what you want out of life. But at the same
Hmm.
time, like, yeah, like you're saying, like, how do you know what that is without having the option of looking back and saying, right, okay, what do I want moving forward? It's so there's lovely themes that go through the book, but I think the important thing for readers, any potential readers out there who are listening to this, um it's a very hopeful book. That's how I felt about it. Was that
Yeah.
deliberate when you were writing it? Did you want to have
Yeah.
it be positive and hopeful?
I did, which is a funny thing to hear, maybe because it is also quite dark. It's a pretty dark book, and Marsh does really face a lot of danger, because once you get going with that, if you could change, something and then something and then something, it's gonna it would be very easy for that to get out of control, I think, if you had that power. And so she really does face the problem of, like, if there is always another path, how do you stop and just start living instead? Because if you theoretically could just keep going forever, y- how could you wake yourself out of it? Because you're never going to get to perfect. So you can't just spend your life like that. So I did really want to can you hear that barking?
I can hear the barking, yeah.
My dog is he's on the couch over here, and he's like the loudest dreamer. That's just dreaming.
Oh, wow.
He's just dreaming. Yeah, he's just barking. His little feet are twitching. Yeah.
Oh, I wonder
Yeah.
what he's dreaming about.
I don't know. It's he does it at least once a day or once a night. And he's not that. I thought maybe it was a puppy thing, but he's going on 6 now, and he still does it. He's just really, yeah, sometimes he'll be full on barking in the middle of the night, which is, so I'll have to warn pet sitters, if you wake up and he's just barking, it's totally fine. He's asleep. You don't have to worry.
Oh, that's so
Yeah.
cute. Oh, how cool would it be
Yeah.
if you could actually see if you had something where you could just see your doggy
Oh,
dreams? That'd be fantastic, right?
I know, because they're so vivid. I mean,
Mm.
I don't think I even dream this vividly.
Well, if
So
if you were sort of waking up in the middle of the night, sort of barking, it would be.
right. You're like, "Hey, she's an author. It's, I don't know."
Yeah, yeah. It's all good. I'm sure I'll read about it at some point in the future. It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
That's a good question, I guess. A nice segue into
yeah.
sort of like the kind of dreams that you have. Did
Hmm.
you put any of the things that you would have loved to have done into the book as certain choices that Marsh got to make? Or
Oh.
yeah, were there any of your dreams in there?
Yeah, I would say sorta. And it's mostly related to a lot of times when she changes location or country, because apparently when I found this out when I was, I think, 18 or 21 or something. My mom and dad got married and were living in Texas. I think they met in Texas. And he was an airline pilot for a commercial airline. And right after they got married and she got pregnant with me, that airline company folded. They just went out of business. They went bankrupt. And so all the pilots from that airline company lost their job, and they were all scrambling to get hired by other airlines, but there were so many of them, it was really difficult because you needed, a bunch of jobs. And after a couple months of searching, he got one offer for Southwest Airlines, which is, at that time, it was an airline. They're kind of international, or they're kind of national now, but at that time it just flew in the American Southwest. So he got Southwest Airlines, and then he got Singapore Airlines. And so we could have moved to Singapore, and I could have been born and raised in Singapore. And they like really debated it back and forth for a little bit, and then they ultimately chose Southwest. So I was born in Phoenix. And I remember hearing that story, And I was so mad. Like, how cool would it be to be born and raised in Singapore? You like, oh, it would have been so, yeah. So I was furious about that. And ever since then, I've always just wondered because that was something that was going to happen right at the beginning of my, I mean, it did happen right at the beginning of my life. And just how different everything would be in my life if I had grown up in a different country. And it almost happened. So basically, anytime Marsha changes countries or gets to go somewhere new, that's just me working on my working on my anger.
Yeah, I do. Have you? Has your mum sort of like read the book and have you told her that? Have you said, look, this is what you did to me. Look, you made me write this
Oh, I
book.
should
It's
tell
like,
her.
yeah,
I mean, she has read it. She's my first reader, so she's read like all the drafts and seen. But I should tell her that actually the reason that Marsh goes to like Iceland and Mexico and Hong it's because I think Marsh is even from Phoenix in the book, or she goes to university in Phoenix or something. It's where she meets Dylan. So yeah, I should maybe she caught up. Maybe she already knows. She probably already
yeah. She
knows.
probably saw it and she was like, oh, this is Singapore all over again. This is.
Yeah.
Your in your introduction to the book, you mentioned that sort of the spark for this was during the lockdown,
Mhm,
wanting a reset. I know that that kind of differs slightly for the sparks for your other books. So, like Book of M, the
mhm.
spark for that very different with the shadows and the festival and things, and the spark for the cartographers with the stories about maps and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is kind of like new for you as for to have a novel coming out that isn't sort of rooted in sort of something that is tangible and physical about the
Mhm.
world. Is it kind of nerve wracking in a different way? The fact that this is the spark for this book was different to the others, or is that something that you're just like, this is my third one, it's all good?
I think, I didn't worry about it too much when I was writing because it came to me so quickly and so strongly. Because usually I these ideas marinate for me for like years and years and years. I thought about the cartographers for like 7 years before I started writing it because I had heard that true story behind the cartographers way back then, and so and then this one was very different. It just kind of it just hit me like, I don't know, like a piano from the sky. And but it was so strong and I felt really so excited about it that I just went forward. And I think by the time I realized I didn't have it didn't start in the same way, it didn't really matter anymore. And that's interesting. I'm thinking about the next thing I'm writing, and it also has been marinating for probably 10 years up here, but it doesn't have a, a real world. I mean, the premise has happened in the real world, but it doesn't have like a direct like Zero Shadow Day or Phantom Settlements on maps.
Mm, that's
I
cool.
don't know. Maybe I'm like shifting as I.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about what you're writing at the minute?
I can. I haven't. I barely started talking about it because it's the first draft. So it's. I'll like stumble my way through it, and you can tell me if it makes any sense. But it's. It is about. It's very dark. It's kind of more the tone of the Book of M. It's dark, it's tragic. It's it's about, let's say, body doubles. It's about body doubles for a they're hired to impersonate a very rich, powerful, famous, like very famous person. And the book is going to be about how as their as their lives start to intertwine in ways that are just like more and more sinister and kind of dangerous, everything's going to start to unravel because if you're all trying to be the same person, who does that, if you're the body double, who does that mean you are? And if you're the original, what does that mean if someone is better at being you than you? So lots of lots of dark questions and psychological kind of manipulation, and but it's a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Oh, that sounds so good. I
Yeah.
can't wait. That is, yeah. Please write it fast because
Awesome.
that's amazing.
I'm trying. I want it to be not quite so long as my other books, so hopefully it'll come, I don't know, maybe 2026 is what I'm really hoping for. So this one will come out in 2024. I will turn it in to my editor in 2025. She'll say it's perfect, hopefully. Maybe. And then hopefully it'll come out in 2026.
When she gets you to like trim it down by like half of the size of
I
the
know.
book, please,
Yeah.
please send me the full thing before you do, because I would love to read
Right.
it
Okay.
immediately.
All of it. Yep. Yep. Will do.
um, a question I have about all this and more, because
Hmm.
I noticed that it's also going to be an audiobook. Um,
Hmm.
how is that going to work with the choose your own adventure elements? Have they figured that out yet?
Yes, we have. It's going to work sort of the way that the print book is, where if you start listening to all this and more, you can listen all the way through and you will get one of the pathways, so you'll get the complete story. But every time you get to a choice in the audiobook, the narrator will instead say something like, to, I don't know, I mean, these aren't the choices, but to choose Dylan, keep listening, or to choose Ren, jump to track 24. And so then the person will have to go to track 24. So they don't have to if they don't want, or if they're doing something like driving or, uh, I don't know, the dishes or walking or something where it's hard to change on your phone. You won't have to change on your phone to experience the full story, but you can if you want.
That's awesome. That's
So
really, really
yeah, it was a
good.
lot of fun to put together. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I guess when you figured out and you finally cracked it, it was just like one of those yes moments. Like, yeah, this is how we do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's really my favorite thing about, I love structure stuff, in books, anything that's got a weird structure. So it was really fun to do the ebook and the audiobook because they are slightly different from each other, but we wanted to keep the paths.
yeah, it's so cool. Um, so basically, if you want to get the full experience, you have to get everything. You have to get the audio, you have to get the print, and you have to get the ebook, right? That's the only way to
I
do it.
mean, I would hope so.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
um, there are three endings to the book. Um, I know the one that I chose, and then I read
Hmm.
the others, and the one that I chose was not my favorite ending. I thought that there was another ending.
Really?
Yeah, there was one.
Oh,
It was great.
you're, you're gonna have to tell me after we
Yeah,
cut.
I'm
You're
not
gonna
going to
have to tell
spoil
me
it for
which one,
anybody,
and then
but I
yeah,
will. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
I'm so curious.
I'm gonna I'm just gonna ask you a question without trying to spoil anything. But
Hmm.
if you were to be writing a sequel to All This and More,
Mm.
where would your story be starting with Marsh? Have you got an idea as to the path that you would choose
Oh.
for to get to where Marsh is going next? Or is that something that you haven't thought about yet?
I You mean, do I know what I would choose as a person, or do I know if I were going to write a sequel, which ending I would have to start from?
Yeah, both.
'Cause both, all of them.
Yeah.
So I think I do know the ending that I would choose, and it's not the ending I would want,
Mm,
but I think it is the ending that is the most true, because I
mm,
think once you got into the bubble, no matter how strong you were, you would not be able to resist it. That probably tells you which
mm.
one I'm thinking
Yeah,
of without
totally,
spoiling anything.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So I think that's not
Weird,
the ending that I would want.
that was the
Yeah.
one that I chose. I was like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It would be so hard not to. Like,
yeah,
I mean, yeah, you all will see when you get there.
yeah.
But yeah, I think that would also be a good, well, no, I think one of the other two endings is what happens if I were going to
Yeah,
go forward with a sequel. Yeah.
yeah, it would be really
Yeah.
interesting. I'll tell you afterwards, but it would be really interesting if
Mhm.
that matched that would be great.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to throw you out some scenarios. Okay, this is for
Okay.
Marsh because obviously we as the reader are going to be choosing things for her. So I'm going to put some scenarios to you, and I want you to
Mhm.
choose for Marsh because then we've all seen
Okay.
that you're involved with the choosing process too.
Yeah.
So scenario number one: Marsh reads the Book of M. Okay, does she A, as soon as she's read the last line, weep uncontrollably into a glass of wine? B, check immediately to make sure that she still has her shadow? Or C, call a loved one and immediately set up a passphrase?
Oh, that's great. I think she's crying uncontrollably into the wine.
Yeah,
Because the twist, it gets
yeah.
her.
Me and Marsh,
Yeah.
we're like this when it comes to the Book of M. Um, Yeah, I still to this day, still when if anybody asks me what's your favorite sort of sentence in it, like last sentence in a book, Book of M is
Mm.
always my go-to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it best final words of a book ever.
That's high praise. Thank you.
Well, I can't choose this one because there are 3 different endings, so that's
I know
yeah.
there's 3 last phrases.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, scenario number 2. Marsh
Mhm,
finds a map that has a place on it which doesn't exist in reality. Does
mhm.
she A, travel there with the map, B, hide the map in a drawer and hope nobody realizes she's got it, or C, sell it to the CEO of a big tech firm so that they can complete their maniacal schemes?
I think she hides it in a drawer, and then she opens the drawer, and either Dylan or Red or Harper have taken it and gone, and so she's like, "Oh, no." She has to follow them. That's probably what happens.
Oh, that's so good. That's yeah. That could be a great meld. That would be pretty yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh,
Okay, last one. Say,
mhm.
at Marsh's law firm, someone's head explodes at random. Does she A, eat a slice of free cake that they're giving out as compensation? B, quit her job because of the potential stress of working there? Or C, would the shock of witnessing that cause her own head to explode?
Probably C, right? Poor Marsh.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
it had well, that's fortunately, that's not any of the endings, so that's
Not gonna
good.
happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I thank you so much for chatting with me about all this.
And more.
Yeah,
No, thank you. It was so great. I
it's
had such a
awesome.
good time.
For
Yeah.
anybody who has enjoyed it or who reads the book and really wants to reach out and say, "Pung, this is amazing," how can they reach you? What are your socials?
My social so I'm mostly on Instagram. That is where I'm the most active. I'm also on X and Threads, but I'm there less often. But in all cases, it's my name. It's Peng Shepherd, and I also have a website with a little like mail form on there too.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah,
Thank you, Pung.
yeah.
All the best with the book and with the launch and everything like that. I kind of feel like with the way that the book is and having all of these different endings, it's a shame. Wouldn't it be great if there was a way that we could do that as part of the interview?
Oh, it would be. That would be really
If
cool.
only there was a way that that could happen.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, there is just one more question that I did want to ask, just before we finish.
Hmm.
And it's about it. I mean, I can't get through an interview without asking about Pinkin, you know, because
Oh,
I kind of
yeah.
feel like Pinkin, has got such a love of books and stories and all this kind of thing. I have a secret theory that Pinkin is really the mastermind behind these books. So So is Pinkin there? Because I would love to ask Pinkin, like whether
he he might be. Let me see. Oh my god, there he
hey
is.
Pinkin,
He is the mastermind.
how do you feel
Yeah.
about the fact that your mum takes credit for all of the amazing stories you come up with?
He says he doesn't mind because he gets all the money. So it all gets spent on him.
Oh, I'm so glad that Pinkin's real because like Pinkin is so cute. Every picture I've seen of Pinkin, I've thought
Oh,
like this has to be an AI generated cat. There's no cat that is that
I
cute in
know.
real life. But
I know. He's adorable. I found him at 3 weeks old on the streets of Beijing, and yeah, and he was starving and kind of hairless actually because he was so hungry. But he's a strong guy. He made it. He's gonna be 16 this year.
wow,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
epic. Hey Pinkin.
Oh, you saying hi?
Superstar. Oh, thank you for
Uh,
gracing us with your presence, Pinkin. That's
yeah,
amazing.
he's got books to write, so he's
Yeah,
gonna.
yeah. He's working on your next body double. I think
He
Pinkin
is, yeah.
Pinkin could be a good body double for you, Pung.
I'm not that beautiful. I mean, he
So there was one more question that I wanted to ask you, Pung,
Yes.
and it kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier, um, in terms of sort of Iceland, because
Mhm.
especially with what you're writing with regard to your body double story, it makes me wonder, because there's obviously a big tundra there, and you've got all these strange things that happen, like you mentioned. It makes me wonder whether Pung is really still in Iceland, and you are just doubling for the real Pung. Um, if that were the case,
Mhm.
how would somebody find out?
I don't think you would. I think my double would be that good, right?
You think so? So you think
Mhm.
that there's a potential scenario where Pung is still out there in Iceland, sort of, still loving that scenery, and you're here in New York just writing books for her.
I think it'll be maybe 2 books will come out at the same time, and they're slightly different. And then because one, the double wrote, and then one, the Pung wrote from Iceland, and then you'll get to see, which one you think is the real author.
Is it fun living Pung's life?
She writes a lot. It's she's just working all the time.
But it's what you want, right? You just want to be out there working. You want to be sort of like, it's better that she's like that than she's sort of like constantly involved with lots of different events and things, because otherwise you'd be exhausted, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, the writing is fun. The writing is the
That's
best
good.
part.
That's good. Does
Yeah.
Pinkin know that Pung's still in Iceland? Have you convinced Pinkin?
Oh, well, I mean, as long as he's getting the food, it's like every 2 hours on the yeah, he's fine.
That's good. So, Pung, there was just one more thing that I wanted to ask you, just before we finish, and it's do you see that out of your window as well, Pung? Do you see
Is it
do you see what's happening? Because oh
how
no, oh no,
mm-mm.
Pung, if you can't see what's happening, run, get a bag and run.
Just
The
just now,
the,
just
the,
just go.
the sloths are coming, Pung. The sloths are coming.
But very I can just like run away very slowly too, I think. It's like Yeah, we could like do a whole sign off and everything and just, but eventually
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
they're very scary
And then
someday.
whoever edits this together can come up with a graphic of some like sloth sort of coming towards the
Just
camera, like post-apocalyptic
no.
thing. That'd be. No. So I didn't have any more questions that I wanted to ask you, Pung, and it's just been absolutely great chatting with you, and it's just genuine pleasure to have chatted about all this and more. And thank you so much for the time that you've taken today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It was a great conversation.